So welcome. And candidate forums are it's certainly a time-honored tradition for the League of Women Voters of the Spokane area. And this is our first candidate forum of the year. And we welcome you to our 2020 primary election candidate forum for State Legislative District 4, State Representative Position 2. The candidates are in alphabetical order: Rob Chase, Republican; Leonard Christian, Republican; Lance Gurrell, Democrat; and Nathan Sabrandi, Republican. I am Sylvia Oliver, and I'm going to be your moderator today, and then Judy Silverstein of the League will be your timer. An election day for the 2020 primary is Tuesday, August 4th. This is a top 2 primary in which the 2 highest vote getters will advance to the general election in November. In this forum, the candidates will have an opportunity to present themselves to the citizens, and the citizens will have an opportunity to learn more about the candidates and be better informed when they mark their ballots. Before the questions begin, the candidates will have up to 30 seconds to introduce themselves and tell the voters why they are running. I will then be asking the candidates questions that have been formulated by the League's Voter Services Committee. Candidates will be asked questions in alphabetical order, with the first speaker rotating with each question. Candidates will have up to 90 seconds to answer each question, with additional time for rebuttal or a follow-up question as appropriate. Our timer, Judy, will signal when the speaker has 15 seconds remaining with the color yellow, and again when the time is up with the color red. Each candidate will have the opportunity for a 1-minute closing statement. And then I will ask as many questions as the time allows. And we're going to be going approximately 30 minutes, and we'll probably have time for 4 or 5 questions. Now, before we proceed, a reminder about voting in the primary. You must be registered in order to vote. You can register by mail or online by July 27th, up to 8 days prior to Election Day. You can register in person up to August 4th. At the Spokane County Elections Office that's located at 1033 West Gardner Avenue. And you can also register at Center Place in the Valley at 2426 North Discovery Place. These sites plan to be open with pandemic precautions. So they're asking the public if they can do as much of the, complete as much paperwork online as possible before they come in. That would be the best. Registered voters will receive their mail-in ballots about 3 weeks prior to Election Day. Voters will not need to mark a ballot, a party preference on this ballot. That was only for the March presidential primary. Ballots must be postmarked or deposited in conveniently located ballot boxes no later than 8 p.m. on Election Day. Ballots can be dropped off on Election Day at one of the voter service centers that were named above. For locations of ballot boxes or voter service centers, information about accessible voting units, or other questions about casting your ballot, you can contact the Spokane County Elections Office at 509-477-2320, or you can go to their website at www.spokanecounty.org/elections. Contact information for the candidates as well as a voter's guide can be found on the website of the Spokane County Elections Office. Additional information about the candidates can be found on the League of Women Voters online voter guide, www.vote411.org. Before we start the questions, each candidate will have up to 30 seconds to tell the voters why they are running. And Judy will indicate when the 30 seconds is up. And we'll start with Rob Chase for this opening statement.
Yes, my name is Rob Chase, and I've been a resident of the 4th Legislative District for, well, at least 30 years. And I'm running for representative because I believe I can be a good representative. I have lots of experience in Olympia. As county treasurer, that was my favorite thing to do, was to go to Olympia and try and get good laws passed. I have the endorsements of both Representative Matt Shea and Bob McCaslin, the 2 representatives from my district. I have been involved in civics politics for at least 20 years now, and it's something I really enjoy, and I'd like to serve as your representative.
Thank you very much. Next will be Leonard Christian.
Thank you, Judy and Sylvia and the League of Women Voters for putting this together each year. I'm former 4th District Washington State Representative Leonard Christian, and I grew up here in Spokane. I got married 9 days after high school graduation at Ferris High School and joined the Air Force a few weeks later. Upon my retirement of the Air Force, I returned back to Spokane and started as a career as a realtor. I realize we're going through some tough times right now, but I'm looking forward to helping us through them in Olympia. I'm Leonard Christian. I'll look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Next will be Lance Grell.
My name's Lance Garrell. For too long, we've had extremists representing us in Olympia, folks who wish to divide us literally by creating a new state. I believe we're better than that. I believe everyone deserves a place at the American table, whether you're 5th generation or a newly arrived American, regardless of how you look, what you believe, or who you love. Everyone deserves a chance to work hard and make a better life for themselves. Those are my values, and that's why I'm running for state representative.
Thank you very much. The next one will be Nathan Sabrandi.
Yes, well, thank you for having me, and thank you to the League for putting this wonderful event on. My name is Nathan Sabrandi. I'm a lifelong Washingtonian. I grew up on the west side, about an hour north of Seattle, in a rural farming community where I built my roots. I went to Seattle Pacific University where I got my nursing degree, and that's where I met my wife, who's now a medical student. We moved up here to the Spokane Valley. We found an amazing community. She's a medical student here. We hope to stay a long time. We want to try to make our community better and give back through public service.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we're going to start our questions. And our first question is for Leonard Christian. We're going in alphabetical order again. And again, you will have up to 90 seconds.
Chase, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, no, because he went first with me.
Okay, I like that.
So we're being very specific.
Very, very fair. Okay.
Very fair, right? Okay, so the first question then for Leonard Christian is, what do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that have prepared you for this position?
Well, thank you, Sylvia. If you had asked me that same question in January or December, you'd had a total different answer, obviously. Because of COVID and what's currently going on in our state in the way of tax revenues, shortfalls, about $9 billion short on our current budget. The only topic in Olympia this year is going to be the budget, and then the budget, and then the budget, and what it's going to take to balance that budget. So I've been there before. I actually served on both the capital budget and the general budget committees. I'm the only one here in this group who's actually served on those committees and voted on the budgets, as a matter of fact. I have a master's degree in administration, MBA from Webster's, so I do believe that that will help me, as it did back then in 2014, to understand what it's going to take to make that budget balance. I also believe that it's important to be able to work with everyone in Olympia, and that's what I'm looking forward to, is being able to unite rather than divide, to get our community together to see if we can get some items done. For me, I'm going to be personally focused on the 4th District and making sure that we can continue to get our projects funded and our schools fully funded here, so we can get our young folks back into the classroom. So as we move forward, I think as everyone is going to know out there, the budget is going to be the most important thing come January. So I do appreciate your time in that question.
The next will be Lance Garrell. The question is, what do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that have prepared you for this position?
I think the most important role for a state legislator is to accurately represent the constituents in their district. I think that it's important to have a representative who views the entire District of Eastern Washington and views all of their constituents equally. I think that as a person who is, I'm an accountant, a CPA, I've worked with budgets. I understand what's involved in trying to regulate the priorities and make the hard decisions about how we decide what to fund. I will say that in this situation, I think of the important responsibility of our state legislature will be to make sure that we can preserve funding for our safety net and preserve funding for the social programs that people are depending on so much during the time of pandemic. We can't afford to be a strong community if we ignore the most vulnerable among us. So I'm going to Olympia to represent those values and to be a sensible voice at the table when we make these hard budget choices. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Next person will be Nathan Sabrandi. Do you want me to repeat the question or?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So what do you consider to be the most important responsibilities of a state legislator, and what specific training, experience, and skills do you have that have prepared you for this position?
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think the number one responsibility of a good legislature is you're always trying to approach two different things, two different aspects of legislation. There's always the values aspect and there's the actual policy aspect. And the connection between those two items is not always abundantly clear. And so I think good legislators are people who know what they don't know, who are humble enough to sit down at the table and pound out those issues and articulate those values very, very clearly. So there's a communications aspect and there's a logistics aspect. As far as my experience is concerned, back in the 2016 race, or in the 2016 cycle rather, I was a campaign manager for a state Senate candidate over on the west side. I saw firsthand some of the damages that really ill-advised, poorly written policies like the Growth Management Act and the harm they do to local communities up there. And it really cemented in my mind the value of having legislators who are willing to actually sit down and listen and establish those common values, because it's not always the most clear thing in the world. So that's that's my approach, and I look forward to bringing it to the table.
Great, thank you so much. And the final person to answer the question number one will be Rob Chase. Mr. Chase, would you want me to repeat the question?
No, I know that we're going to be going to the legislature. So, you know, the legislature makes laws, hopefully good laws, and we represent the constituents of the 4th District when we go there. So, you know, our duty is to represent them and to get feedback from them and to listen to them. And their duty is to pay us and to correct us if we get out of line. And I've got, I had a lot of experience in Olympia. I actually got a state law passed as county treasurer, which is partial payments on property taxes, any amount, any time. I led the charge on that, and it passed almost unanimously. And so now it's only in Spokane County, but people can make partial payments any amount, any time. And I got that from my constituents. I asked them what can be done, how can we can improve things, and I had a good rapport with them too. So I have a bachelor's in business administration from Eastern Washington University. I was county treasurer for 8 years, and actually during that time, we started out with 25 people, and even though our revenues increased 20%, we still had 25 people after 8 years. I've attended all the classes of Center for Self-Governance and used that in a lot of the legislative activities that I had, and also in my county treasurer position. So I think I'm, you know, well armed to go ahead and represent the district of 4th District citizens.
Thank you very much for your answers to that question. Question number two, the first person to answer will be Lance Gurrell. And the question is, what do you think the state role should be in addressing racial injustice and use of force by police and police oversight? What specific steps would you take or support to address these issues? So Mr. Gurrell.
I'm a strong believer in the importance of civilian oversight for law enforcement. I think that our police departments and our sheriff departments should be representative of their communities and should be responsible to their communities for their policies. I think that the role of the state is that there should be state standards for police accountability. I do not believe that a local sheriff or a local police chief is the one who should make the decisions about police accountability. I think that the state should have standards that require police departments and sheriff's departments to follow community standards, and that the specifics of that would be up to the communities, but the communities should decide how law enforcement should be overseen. I think there are other places that the state can step in. I think that there are certain policing tactics that need to be banned statewide. But the main thing is that communities should have the most important role in deciding police oversight. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one to answer this question will be Nathan Sabrandi, and I'll just state the question again. What do you think the state role should be in addressing racial injustice and use of force by the police and police oversight? What specific steps would you take or support to address these issues?
Well, I think it's important to note, as a conservative, my first approach is always to try to advocate for local control first. I think local communities do know what's best for them. At the same time, we do have a significant portion of our community out here, particularly our African-American community, who communicate to us very clearly and forthrightly that their experience with the police has been markedly different than it is for the white community at large. I think it's important to respect that. If you say you have a different experience, then, well, it's clear you have a different experience. It's also important to realize, though, that experience is one thing and metrics and measures are another. And so it's very difficult to answer the question as far as whether regulation should be happening at the state level, unless we're actually able to come to the table and agree upon measures and metrics that would indicate an excess of police brutality and how we would measure the efficacy of those regulations at the state level. If we're willing to come to the table and define those very narrowly and carefully, then I think there's definitely a discussion to be had. But like I said, my first approach is always to try to keep local control unless it can be proven that the net negative externalities that are occurring as a result of a lack of state control are overwhelming to a point where state rulemaking is overwhelmingly necessary. So that's sort of my thoughts on how to approach that.
Great, thank you very much. Next person to answer this question will be Rob Chase.
Okay, we need to find the right balance of police power, but also, keeping our freedoms here to allow us freedom of expression, freedom to assembly, and keeping things locally too. It's a different situation in Seattle than it is here in Spokane Valley or the rural areas of Spokane County. So we have to talk to the law enforcement officers. I know several of them, see what they have to say, but also talk to the citizens and get feedback from them. And to be, careful when we make these laws. We don't want to harness them from, doing their duty of protecting us, and make sure that there's nothing that's, a violation of human rights in the same time, in the same meaning, because we've had incidences that have happened that have caught a lot of attention around the country. And usually this is, one incident out of thousands of police officers all over. So I think our law enforcement officers do a good job. I had a chance to become a law enforcement officer myself, but I really didn't want to do that. They've got a tough job to go, and we need to support them.
Great, thank you very much. And the last person to answer this question will be Leonard Christian. Would you like me to repeat the question, or are you okay?
I got it.
Okay.
So I believe, number one, in safe communities. As a realtor, people move to Spokane, Washington because it's a safe place to live, raise a family, and have a business. And unless you have a solid police force that is backed with both training dollars and a solid budget, people are not going to move to our community. They'll be moving away from it. And so we're blessed to have a community here in Spokane County where our sheriff, I believe he got 76% of the vote last time around. That means a lot of trust. You don't vote for a sheriff unless you trust that sheriff. So I believe in, as a state legislator, we need to make sure the power is in the local police departments, the local sheriffs, and they know what's best in their community. So somebody from, say, Moses Lake can't have the same rules that somebody from Seattle is going to be dealing with. Completely different. We're blessed that we live in a republic. A republic is a community of a country of laws. And so those laws are what the policemen and women are forced to force out there on the public. So if you don't like the way a law is written, then you need to work on changing the law, not expecting the policemen to make a decision on their own if they want to enforce that law or not. So I'm very much so supportive of our police force and our men and women who are doing the job out there.
Thank you very much for your answers to that. Now we're going to move on to question number 3. So question 3 and question 4 are a pair, and they're both about the state budget. So we're going to be asking about cuts and we're going to be asking about revenue, but we're asking those in 2 separate questions to give you sufficient time to answer those. So we're starting with question 3, and we're going to be starting with Nathan Sabrandi. And that question is, given the precipitous drop in state tax revenues due to the pandemic and increased expenses for safety net measures, what are your top 3 spending cut recommendations at the state level in order to maintain a balanced budget?
Well, thank you for the question. In regards to revenue, I do think it is important to note that despite the precipitous drop in revenue from all sources, it is also the case that the revenues year over year are still up about a little over 4% from the previous biennium. It's just that simply spending is up nearly 20%. I think it's pretty clear that Olympia has a spending problem rather than a revenue problem. I would just simply rhetorically ask the, members of the audience, did you feel like everything was massively underfunded in the previous biennium? And I think everyone would be like, no, because our budget has pretty much doubled in the last 10 years. As far as spending cuts are concerned, I think it's important that we take an approach that doesn't try to discriminate amongst different types of budget cuts. So I don't know that I would really even give a top 3. There are certain parts of the budget like education that have their own revenue sources and stuff. So it's going to be more difficult to approach cuts in those areas. I don't think it's the paramount duty of the state, obviously, to amply fund education. But other than that, it's important to not have any sacred cows. I think we need to be proportional as much as possible. And if there's a place to try to not have budget cuts, I think it's going to be in Department of Commerce initiatives that are supporting our local businesses during this most difficult time. So I've gotten that question a lot as far as what are the top 3, and the answer is there's not really a top 3. There's a top infinity, and they're all rather equally weighted.
Okay, thank you. So the next will be Rob Chase.
Yes, next year is going to be very strange. And this year, the whole COVID thing isn't over yet. I think it was an overreaction by the governor. And, as far as dealing with this COVID virus, I think revenues are down because a lot of people, their businesses were already having trouble, and then they shut down for several months. And, we should have allowed freedom. It says in the state constitution, all power is inherent, in the people. So people with businesses should have had the choice of keeping them open if they wanted to, and people could have patronized if they wanted to, or people could not have patronized them, or they could have shut down their business. So it's all about freedom, and people need to have a choice. But it is kind of a new ball game. And as far as cutting back, I think there's always waste that we can look at no matter what the situation is. And of course, the big things in the state are health, education, and welfare. But at the state level, you've got a lot of power. The states created the federal government, the states created the counties, and at the 10th Amendment, there's a lot of things that we actually can do. So, we can always look at things that are adding value or just adding waste. A couple ideas I had was I like the idea of a state bank like North Dakota has, and copying what they have, a state infrastructure bank. And instead of using bonds, and what is really fully funded is kind of a question now. But to use those instead of buying bonds from this country or municipalities, we could actually invest in infrastructure. We might be able to band together and finish the Columbia Basin project or other things that will affect Spokane County and Spokane Valley. And the other thing too, I think, is we could actually tax big tech companies. I mean, I think the national government does, but I don't think the state governments are, tax them all the clicks where they get benefit, as people click upon their sites. So those are a few ideas I have, but we got to take them as they are and work on common cause issues.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer there. Oh, sorry.
Would you like me to answer now?
Yes, you can answer now. I'm sorry. Do you want me to repeat the question or not? Are you okay?
We'll save the time. So what's going on right now with our budget is, quite honestly, businesses are not open, or when they are opened, they're at half capacity. And I can tell you, they're not going to make it at half capacity or curbside pickup. So we need to work hard at getting Washington State fully opened again. I can tell you that there's a lot of people. I live here in Spokane, and the freeway is solidly packed between Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene and Spokane. And that's because people are going over there to spend the money that should be coming back into Washington State's coffers in the way of taxes. So I understand there's a solid risk with COVID and the spread of COVID, but our businesses are not going to survive at 50% capacity. We've got to get them reopened and give them a fighting chance to do this. I'm also really concerned about our governor, who's not called for a special session. It's kind of like when a ship hits an iceberg in the middle of the ocean. You don't wait until it's almost sunk before you turn on the pumps. You get going right away. You try and save the ship immediately. And we're having that issue here in Washington State with just this year, a projected shortfall of $4.5 billion. The governor said he's going to furlough some state employees. At the same time, he's giving them and the teachers a 3% pay increase. Now, I appreciate our teachers. I realize they're state workers. Every one of those paychecks have a family behind it. But I'll bet you those families would forego that 3% and still keep a job. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to working on that issue.
Great, thank you so much. And the last person to answer this question about spending cuts to the budget is going to be Lance Garrell.
I think I approach this question different than my opponents do. It's the job of government to maintain the services necessary for our safety net and to take care of our communities. The answer to that, everybody would like to say, oh, well, we're going to save money here, we're going to save money there. But in answer to the question, who felt like we weren't well enough served in the last biennium, I would ask, what services have we had that we feel like as a community we can really forego? And I would say that the services that are necessary to keep the state government going need to be maintained. I think that, unlike others, I think that we've been very fortunate to have the leadership of Governor Inslee. I've disagreed with him on certain things. I certainly think that our residential construction shouldn't have been shut down. I don't think fishing should have been shut down. But we don't have the freedom to cry fire in a crowded theater. We have personal freedoms and we have public responsibilities as part of living in a society together. I think that raising more revenue through reaching out and asking the people who are the most wealthy in our society to reinvest in Washington is the answer.
Okay, so we're going to be moving on and actually asking that question, the next question. Thank you for answering question number 3, and we're moving on to question number 4. And once again, this has to do with the state budget. And the first person to answer this question will be Rob Chase. And the question is, in addition to spending cuts, please explain what, if any, new revenue sources, elimination of tax exemptions, or structural changes to our taxing system would you consider in order to maintain a balanced budget, Mr. Chase? And then I'll tell you when your time is up, because obviously you can't see. So.
Okay. How much time do I have?
90 seconds for each of the questions.
Okay. Well, one thing I do favor as my two representatives in the 4th District is a 51st state. And I think with the 51st state, we would have a lot more local autonomy here. We would be able to elect our own governor. We'd be able to elect our own 2 U.S. senators. And the rural area of Eastern Washington is so different from the metropolitan area of Western Washington. And we would still stay in the Union, of course, but we'd start out with a whole new constitution. So you would, a blank slate for a constitution. So there's a lot of different things you would look at. I think probably like the fair tax would be good, which has, it's a consumption tax, but it has a prebate in it that protects people below the poverty level. I think maybe even the ideas of Henry George, Georgian economics from the 1880s, as far as a land tax might be another thing to go to. I definitely do not want an income tax, and with another idea is with the new state, we could have a loyal title, not have property taxes anymore. It's like the people are renting, they're not actually own their homes or houses, they're renting them, from the government. So there's a lot of things I think we can redo taxes, but the important thing is, we need competition. I think we need competition in education, with possibly unrestricted vouchers for homeschoolers and private schools, and that would actually make public schools more effective too because of the competition. The same thing in healthcare too. If we allowed more businesses to come in and compete for people's healthcare dollars, that would be a good thing too. And of course, looking at social welfare, we have to help the helpless, but there are people that we could actually privatize a lot of that too.
Okay,
and turn it back over, not have a big bureaucracy.
Yeah, your time is up. Thank you so much for your answer to that question.
Thank you.
So the next person to answer the question about different revenue sources, let's come back over here, would be Leonard Christian. These are the revenue.
Thank you again for that question. When I was in the legislature in 2014, the biennial budget was $66 billion. Now it's over $120 billion. So it's almost doubled since I left the legislature last. Do you feel like you're getting double the money value from your government now? I certainly don't. It just seems like it's more expensive and gotten larger. And as far as the 51st state idea goes, that would immediately double the government in Washington state, because you'd be cutting, 2 governors, 2 legislatures. You'd be doubling the size of government. So as a Republican, I believe in less government, not more government, and less taxes, not more taxes. Right now is not the time to increase the taxes on the people or the small businesses. It's just not fair to them. You're asking them to work at 50% capacity and then possibly asking for them to pay more taxes. It's foolishness. We need to do our job as the legislature and get the programs that need to be cut. The ones that are doing a good job, some of the safety net programs, there's some that are working well, there's some that are not working so well. Our homeless problem, we need to start addressing the root cause of homelessness, not just adding tens and tens of millions of dollars to it each and every year. We need to start figuring out what's going to do to help these folks become productive, tax-paying citizens of the state of Washington.
Great. Thank you so much. The next one will be Lance Garrell. Could you unmute, Mr. Garrell?
I think it's more than reasonable to expect people who are making over $5 million in income a year to help reinvest that money in the state of Washington. I think it's the American way for people to support their communities. Currently, with our current tax structure, people making $50,000 or less in the state of Washington pay 20% of their tax in state taxes through sales tax and the business and occupation tax, which businesses pass along to consumers. We're very consumer based. People at the upper income levels pay 3% in state taxes. I think it's the correct thing, the American thing, the moral thing to ask people who have profited the most in the good years that we've had to help us through these times by instituting whatever constitutional changes are necessary to have a capital gains tax on high earners over 5 million, and that we need to use that money to reinvest in the state of Washington.
Great, thank you very much. And the last person to answer this question will be Nathan Sabrandi.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'll briefly give a little bit of pushback on the characterization of taxes as investments in the community. Investments in the community are most effective when they're actually put into the free market by free people. And right now, when you have an economy that's on the rocks, the last thing we need to be doing is decreasing the amount of capital that's available for investment in our economy. So I'll push back against that idea of taxes being an investment. It's not an investment. It's taking money away from the free market where it could do the most good, especially in a tax and regulatory environment that's already at record highs. The very last thing we need to be doing right now is increasing that tax and regulatory burden. I think that's a decent ethos to go towards. I'll also push back a little bit against the 51st state idea as well, just simply because we need to be looking at, policies and options that actually have a chance of passing. And one thing that I don't think the 4th legislative district voters are up for are more obstructionist policies for wedge issues that have no chance of actually passing in a real session. I'll also talk a little bit about the sales tax. A lot of times liberals push back against the sales tax, calling it unfair. The fact of the matter is, those European socialist nations that they idolize so much all use value-added taxes, which are basically sales taxes. It's the most fair way to do things. It makes us an extremely attractive state as far as business is concerned because of the lack of an income tax. In the legislature, I will strongly oppose any tax increases whatsoever, any regulatory increases whatsoever, especially income taxes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answers. Now we're going to be moving on to question number 5. And question number 5 will start with Leonard Christian. And the question is, in recent years, the legislature has provided a significant amount of additional state funding to public schools statewide in response to the Mcclary decision. Do you support or oppose additional state funding for public schools to address local budget shortfalls? Mr. Christian.
Well, that's an excellent question. Schools, my daughter just finished Whitworth University to become a school teacher, and I got to watch as she went through her teacher's aid programs and what's going on in the schools. And I have just got through talking with several of the union folks on schools. And as a father of a soon-to-be teacher, I want to support our schools. But I'm also questioning the fact that we gave more and more and more money, and I don't see our grades increasing. And this is concerning to me as somebody who writes checks and pays taxes. What are we getting out of our dollars? I believe the state needs to start getting out of the way and letting the local folks have more control. The number one thing that I see coming from the state is comprehensive K through 12 sex education. We have, that should have never passed. That should be something the local schools are having the control and the say over, not a state government. And we saw the voters are speaking very clearly because it will be on the ballot to be able to vote that bill out come November. So I'm pretty excited to see that the people are starting to say, I've had enough. We don't mind funding our schools, but we want excellent students and excellent teaching for the money we're spending. So thank you.
Thank you. Next person to answer this question will be Lance Gurrell.
The Mcclary decision and the state constitution do provide for the basics for education, but we need more than basics. We have too many schools that don't have counselors, that don't have mental health professionals. Schools they're forced to leave it up to law enforcement because they don't have adequate funding. I think our job is to protect our children. I think our job of protecting our children means that education needs to be a paramount responsibility. for us. I am for more investment in early education and guaranteed childcare. I think the pandemic has shown us that childcare is an essential service and that we cannot go back to work and we cannot have people go back to work and we cannot expect our essential workers to work if they don't have safe, affordable childcare. I want to make one comment on the sex education bill and the proposition that's coming up to overturn it. The way the law is written, local schools have complete authority. The authority on sex education rests totally with parents and school districts. I believe that's the proper approach, and I think it was a great compromise in the legislature to say that our students need to be kept safe, but it's up to parents in the school districts to make the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, for your answer. And we have now Nathan Sabrandi to answer this question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think, first thing to point out is obviously it lays out very clearly in the state constitution that education is the paramount duty of the state and we must amply fund it. We did meet that requirement from the Mcclary case in the previous biennium. I think it's the thing that I would say about it is first, ethos-wise, I think it's important to focus on within education, to focus on protecting funding for programs that provide early interventions for kids with disabilities like dysgraphia or dyslexia. Early interventions in those cases can have really, really positive effects and basically bring kids up to a baseline level of functioning that makes them no different than any other kid. But if they don't get those early interventions, then they fall way behind. And so when you're talking about education funding, I think it's important to look at where the largest effects are. Beyond that, I'll also say that it's hard to go to the voters and go to the constituents and ask them for more tax revenues when you've more than doubled the education budget in the last 10 years. And as Leonard said earlier, you're not seeing a ton of super positive results in terms of test scores and grades from that. We need to prove to the voters before we give even more funding to this. We need to prove to voters that this is not going to be just another subsidy for radical Planned Parenthood sponsored and written sex ed education and continued union care packages.
Thank you very much. And the final person to answer this question is Rob Chase. Would you like me to read the question again, or are you good with that?
Well, no, I think it's about the Mcclary decision, which I think was a poor decision by the Supreme Court. What fully funded? What does fully funded mean? It's sort of subjective and ambiguous, and it's not the Supreme. It's up to the legislature to fund these things, not the Supreme Court. I would also say that talk about the Planned Parenthood curriculum, the graphic. Think they want to teach. A lot of parents object to that, and education really belongs to the parents, not the public schools. So actually, a lot of people would like to take their kids out of school, not have them subjected to that, because we have a duty to protect our children's health. But a lot of people believe we have a duty to protect their souls too. So, I think, having some more aid for private schools and people at home school, like with some kind of voucher program, would actually allow more competition, be a message to public schools too, to compete, better than they do. So all in all, the Mcclary decision, especially after this COVID virus thing and revenues being down, we can't keep funding, schools to the extent that we have been. So we got to, I think, really concentrate on the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic, especially, and the Constitution.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Question number 6, and we'll be starting with Lance Gurrell. And the question is, please explain the role you believe government should play in providing access to affordable health care and any policies you would support or oppose.
I think that the COVID pandemic has showed us that in order to have a healthy community, everybody needs to have health care. I support universal health care. Everybody should have health care. I believe it's a right. And beyond just the right, it's the best thing for a community to do to have everybody in the community healthy. Um, COVID's a really good example. You can't have a healthy community when you have sick individuals going around the community. Um, it makes our community stronger. If everybody's healthy, it's better for businesses. And so I'm a firm believer in universal health care. I think that there are initiatives afoot to have Washington State take the lead. We were doing better with universal health care during basic health. I think we've lost a little ground, but I think it's important that everybody has health care. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person to answer this question will be Nathan Sabrandi.
Thank you. Yes, this is an issue near and dear to my heart. I work as a nurse at Deaconess Hospital. I've been on the front lines of this pandemic. My wife is also training, as I mentioned earlier, she's training to be a rural family physician out here in the 4th Legislative District and in Eastern Washington in general. Healthcare is an infinitely complicated issue because it is the, by far, but basically besides nuclear power plants, it is the most regulated industry in existence. And the amount of administrative bloat that has occurred as a result of those excess regulations is a huge factor in why the prices are high. Another huge factor is that there's a complete lack of price transparency. There's no connection between consumption of healthcare and the impact of the costs of healthcare. I'd love to see some more progress on that. I think there's some things we can do at the state level to address that. I also think we need to really focus on empowering localities to develop local solutions. A great example of that is one my wife worked on, which is a program out in Chelan where she's doing some of her rural rotations. And in that program, they basically created a home visit program. They realized they had extra capacity within their EMT staff to do home visits. And that really decreased the amount of falls that seniors were having at home and decreased the amount of ER visits and ultimately saved a lot of money in the local healthcare system there. So I really focus on those local solutions. Other issues include things like portabilities to cross state lines, a little bit of tort reform, things like that, but infinitely complicated. And I think there's common sense things we can do to make it better, but near and dear to my heart for sure.
Great, thank you very much. Next person to answer this question about healthcare is Rob Chase.
Yes, as a child, doctors actually came to the house, and if someone got injured or got cancer, it didn't mean bankruptcy. And in the 1960s, with a great society, government got more and more into it, and the price went up. So, I would advocate for medical savings accounts, and that would, you can put money into that would pay for catastrophic insurance or out-of-pocket expenses. And also more competition will always bring the price down, and more choices. Now we have to help the helpless. Of course, we have to have a safety net, but a large part of that would be nonprofits that enjoy doing those things. And plus, I think that would be actually part of a hospitals that used to be too budget where they had uncollectible expenses. They never threw anybody out on the street. So I think it's become way too regulated, and that's why our health care costs have gone up.
Okay, thank you very much. The next final person to answer this question will be Leonard Christian.
Well, I choose to drive a truck. Now, how about you guys? Would you like it if everyone was forced to drive a truck? Probably not. I was stationed in Australia where they had universal health care. And I also have done a lot of studying on Canada where they've had a lot of universal health care there, single payer. And the issue there is you have great health care as long as you don't need it. If you need a surgery, it's very difficult to get it scheduled. In fact, a lot of Canadian folks come down to America to do it. I shouldn't be forced to buy health care that includes family planning per se. I don't think I quite need that, but yet that's what's being forced on a lot of folks. I agree with Nathan that we need to have less regulation and more portability of our healthcare programs where you can buy and transport that healthcare packages across state lines where
Leonard, you got muted.
Not sure how that happened. I didn't touch anything. So I was going to say I agreed with you, Nathan, that we need less regulations on this, some definite tort reform, and I do believe a lot more portability where we can go across state lines and buy policies across state lines where we'll have more competition, which will drive the price down. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. We will have one more question. We don't have time. Okay, so we're actually going to be completing the candidate form. So at this point, our candidates can have a 1-minute closing statement. And again, we'll be doing this in alphabetical order. And the first person to have their closing statement will be Nathan Sabrandi.
Well, thank you again to the league for putting this on. It's a great public service to get some exposure and some time for the public to see their local candidates running and get to know them a little bit. My pitch to voters is that as a nurse and a conservative, I'm uniquely qualified to address the crisis of our time, COVID-19. This is the #1 issue on voters' minds. 85% of them agree. #1. We need to be sure that we are balancing our interests of economic health and public health. We need to understand that economic health is a part of public health. I want to see a paradigm shift in terms of how public health communicates and shows that it values the interests and values of conservatism so that we have more trust built up in our institutions, because we see a tremendous lack of trust there right now. I'm also uniquely qualified as a unity candidate. This is my first run for public office. I haven't had time to burn bridges. I'm someone all Republicans, Democrats, and independents can get behind, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you very much. A closing statement of 1 minute. Rob Chase, would you like to have your closing statement?
Okay, thank you again, League of Women Voters. This is my 7th turnaround, I think, with the league. And speaking about COVID a little bit, you know, the average victim of COVID was 80 years old. So, you know, we don't quarantine the healthy, we quarantine the unhealthy, and, you know, watch out for them. But like I say, there's a big overreaction. Also, I'm not sure my fellow candidates understood the 51st state concept is it would be more freedom, less taxes, less regulation, more representation with their own governor and 2 U.S. senators too. And I think if we had less regulation, less taxes, businesses would flock here. We could have livable wage jobs again. And as I was the only public official to actually oppose Hydro One buying out Avista. And I think that would have resulted in a lot higher rates and would have hurt businesses and residences too. I took a 2-term pledge as county treasurer, and I kept that pledge too. And I was a good treasurer, and I believe I will be a good representative.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to Leonard Christian for his closing statement.
Thank you again, Sylvia, Judy, and the League of Women's Voters for taking the time to put this on. Since I left office in 2014, the budget has nearly doubled. The governor has signed comprehensive K-12 sex education into law, and I believe he's abused his emergency powers. I'm asking for your support to help me to return to Olympia, to place a limit on those emergency powers, and ensure the cost of COVID recovery does not come from the pockets of families and small businesses. If you'd like to find out more about me or our campaign, please look at leonardchristian.com. Again, that's leonardchristian.com, where you can see a full list of the folks who have already endorsed me, and endorse yourself if you'd like. And I'm always available for you to talk with me. I'm Leonard Christian, the reasonable right candidate, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you very much. The last person to make the closing statement will be Lance Gurrell.
I have chosen Eastern Washington as my home after living all over the country. It truly is the best place to raise a family. I live here with my wife, Kimma, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I've spent my 25-year accounting career helping businesses and nonprofits manage their finances and work more efficiently. I understand budgets, and I will work tirelessly to ensure that the state is responsible with our hard-earned dollars. I want to go to Olympia to fight for efficient, effective government, not small, not big, effective government that works for the people. and to advocate for policies that make investments in early education, guaranteed child care, and better mental health services, and to fight for the values that make America great, strong communities and strong families. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and please, everybody get out and vote in August. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your participation in this candidate forum. And now we have some closing statements. Thank you so much again for participating in our candidate forum for State Legislative District 4, State Representative Position 2. Again, the candidates are Rob Chase, Republican; Leonard Christian, Republican; Lance Gurrell, Democrat; and Nathan Sabrandi, Republican. The League will host a general election forum in late September for the top 2 finishers of this race. And once again, here's a reminder about voting in the primary. Ballots must be mailed on or deposited in ballot boxes in convenient community locations by August 4th, 2020, or they can be dropped off at one of the voter service centers on August 4th. The top 2 vote getters in this race will advance to the general election. In order to vote, you must be registered to vote. You can register by mail or online by July 27th, or you can register in person by August 4th. For more information on voting procedures, you can go to the Spokane County Elections website at www.spokanecounty.org/elections. If you have questions or special concerns casting your ballot, you may contact them by phone at 509-477-2320. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Spokane area, thanks to all of the candidates for their participation in this forum. We hope this has given you, the voters, information about the candidates that will help you make informed decisions when you mark your ballots. Additional voter service information is available through the League of Women Voters at www.lwvspokan.org and also at www.vote411.org. Thank you so much for joining us.